Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of askgn. If you have questions for the next one, leave them in the comments section below, or you can join our Patreon Discord by going to patreon.com/gamersnexus and posting a question in the askgn section. Before getting to some of the discussion and questions for this week, we have another gift to open from NZXT, who have contributed such things as the puck, or the puck. Or there's more of them, but you get the idea. They send a lot of these. So the newest gift says on the back, it's a shirt. On the back it says NZXT with their new logo, I guess, their new font. And on the front, it is a reference to a clip when we were in the Taiwan digital marketplace when a friend of the site came by and said to us,
"Fuck gamers nuts." We were just watching your video.
And that clip, by the way, a lot of people in the comments for that video, that was for the digital marketplace vlog. A lot of people didn't get that that guy, even though we had a subtitle for it, is actually a friend of the site, and he was just screwing around with us. And everyone speaks another language around you, so you hear someone yell something in English, it's already enough of a catch. And then they say something like, "Fuck gamers Nexus," and you're like, whoa. So it was a good attention grab. But no, he actually was not just a random jerk. But yeah, they sent us this. So thank you, NZXT, for the thermal paste cleaning rag. We'll put good use to it. I have a lot of CPUs and GPUs that really need to get a good scrub. So I'm planning on soaking this in alcohol and then using it to clean things off. And it probably burn pretty well after that too. So thank you for the shirt, though. I really appreciate it. And before anyone freaks out and thinks that NZXT is being really rude, it's just playful humor. But thank you, that's pretty cool. So that is the gift. And then before we get to the rest of it, this content is brought to you by EVGA and their CLC kit. You can buy one of the EVGA hybrid kits to convert one of your 10 series video cards into a liquid cooled card, as we've done a dozen times by now. If you're curious to learn more, click the link in the description below. So the first thing I wanted to show off just briefly for stuff that is to come, we just got this in, as in ordered last night and had it one day shipped. So this is going to allow us to clamp current. So it's a current clamp. We can actually now take more accurate power readings of what's going on, for example, through EPS 12 volt cables. So we'll be able to clamp those and have a full video on it at some point, be able to get more accurate readings for the power draw rather than just straight from the wall. And that will allow us to see how much power exactly is going through something like a VRM for an X299 motherboard, which is a hot topic right now. This was a good reason to get into more accurate power readings because really there's a lot to discuss with X299. And that leads into the next topic, which is rushed launches. So before we get into the questions, again, kind of front-loading these with discussions lately. Rushed launches, X299 was certainly rushed. There is clear as day that the motherboard vendors didn't have enough time, almost just like Ryzen, really. They all kind of complained to us they didn't have enough time. And the CPUs didn't really have enough time to get information out there technically as to what they're supposed to do, who they're supposed to target, how they're supposed to work. And there were a couple problems. Now, they're not the worst CPUs ever. Don't take it out of bounds. But the 7900X is still a damn good CPU. But we have a whole big review on that, talking about all of its ups and downs, like thermals and power, and on the upside, the insane multi-threading capabilities, because 20 threads, of course, it's going to do well on multi-threaded tasks. But that's not without its downsides. The point, though, to address here, rather than just re-review the entire chip, which if you want to get in more depth on either of those points, look at the review and argue with us in those comments, because this isn't the place for that. The point is, rush launches are a bit of a trend right now. Vega is another one. So AMD said they would ship Vega in Q2, and they did it. They shipped it about a day or two before the end of the quarter, just like a paper written an hour before due date. And it shows. Vega is not the worst thing to ever happen either. Same thing as Intel's X299. They both have their ups and downs. Vega's downs right now are largely relegated to the obvious rushed aspects, things like driver stability and things like functional software, like Radeon settings, or even just general marketing. And that's the point I want to mention here. So the card, as people keep copying and pasting into comment forums, is not a gaming card. We spent 5 minutes discussing that in the Vega FE review. But the thing to talk about here is that when you generally have a not a gaming card, you brand it something differently. And AMD has done something very interesting. With Vega, they liked the architecture name so much, as they've said, that they took the name Vega and they applied it to the video card series. Whereas normally you have Polaris and you have RX series cards, they weren't RX Polaris. They were RX 400, RX 500, and so on. But this is RX Vega or Vega FE. Both have Vega in the name. And this is where it seems like an uphill battle that AMD has created for themselves for marketing, where Vega Frontier Edition is, because it leads the RX Vega launch, is going to kill some of the search potential for RX Vega, because you now have people looking up Vega, and what's going to come up? Vega FE will come up, unless it's launch day of RX Vega, in which case Google will prioritize those reviews. But Vega FE will come up, and if people aren't informed and don't understand where that card is marketed, it will reflect negatively on Vega as a whole, even if it's not meant to be marketed to those searching users, maybe gamers, for example, because it's going to come up with bad gaming performance compared to the price. And even if it's not meant for gaming, that's what they're going to be faced with. So you've got one good shot to launch new products. And after that point, the people who are not day-to-day enthusiasts, like most of you, don't necessarily keep up with this stuff. So they see Vega FE and they already have an opinion on where it sits. And that's why we spent 5 minutes talking about what the card is for in the review. But another point here, the interesting aspect is that the high-end card is Vega, Vega FE. The gaming high-end card is RX Vega, and presumably other cards will be Vega variant names as well. So there's a chance for confusion. You lose some of the halo effect marketing, whether it deserves it or not, of something like Titan. I own a Titan. Everyone knows where that sits on the stack. But if you own Vega, that doesn't really necessarily mean anything once the other Vega cards come out. So you lose some marketing potential there. And then AMD also has a history of changing their names and losing some of the, we'll call it momentum for known nomenclatures, like the R9 series, the R7 series, which superseded the HD series, I believe they were called, HD 7000, for example, series. So they have a history of changing the names. This time it's just a weird change, and the only point of this kind of discussion offshoot is to say that the naming is going to hurt the product marketing overall, because Vega FE will be attached to RX Vega, whereas something like Titan XP is kind of distant from GTX, even though, like many of the other sites when we reviewed it, we said this is not a good buy for gaming because it's way too expensive. You could buy a 1080 Ti and have basically the same performance. But that card is at least distant by name and branding, whereas Vega FE is kind of in the same boat in terms of naming. So there's going to be an uphill battle, a hill that AMD has built themselves, of trying to claw back an understanding of product positioning for RX Vega versus Vega FE. That's really the only point of bringing this up. And I bring it up because there are a lot of questions we had that were like, we posted that Vega content and people were saying, wait, Vega launched? What? And the reason that people didn't hear about it launching is because it wasn't marketed to them. It wasn't marketed to gamers. So there's this confusion of like, wait a minute, this is out? And that's because RX Vega comes later, but it has the same name, hence the confusion. Whereas if it were, if a Quadro card launches, you don't really have confusion in the gaming market, or if a FirePro card launches, or WX as they call it now, same thing. The gaming buyers don't say, wait a minute, that launched, because it's not relevant to them. So very interesting choices on AMD's part. We'll see how RX Vega plays out. No commentary on performance there yet. We don't have it, so there's no point in speculating, as we've said since the review of Vega FE. But we do have more content on Vega coming up with the FE card, including the rest of the thermal results from the hybrid mod. Okay, so enough of that. We'll talk more of that with the content on Vega as it continues with the actual product. First question is from travelinty, who posted on, I believe, YouTube. Oh no, this was either YouTube or Discord, but the question was, askgn, curious if you're using liquid metal deliding the CPU or on a GPU, would it be okay to use a thin thermal pad around to keep it contained, the liquid metal that is, as long as it's not thicker than the die itself? So basically the question here is, if you're applying liquid metal, which is liquidy, as the name suggests, to the surface of a die, how do you contain it from spilling over onto the substrate? And the answer is just apply a really thin layer, and then if you're still concerned, you can use tape. I wouldn't use thermal pads for this, but if you're concerned, you could tape off the substrate portion with something like masking tape or electrical tape, and spread your liquid metal on it. If there is overspill, then you can just pull the tape off. What I would recommend is, before going even that far, play around first with an analog for the CPU. So rather than just going straight to applying liquid metal onto the thing that you care about, just apply it on some other non-important plastic surface maybe, so you can get a feel for how it spreads and how much you need to cover that surface, and then go from there, because that'll give you an idea of how much is required. Next question. jlrockafella says, I've been watching Silicon Valley lately, and even in there they are making fun of people who got duped into buying VR. What happened to all the hype? This is the same as the whole 3D bubble. I'm not up to speed on the 4th season, but I do know what you're talking about. So VR, we had 2 opinion pieces on VR before getting into the objective benchmarks. The first one was, this thing is really cool. That was when Valve showed it off at the Steam booth at GDC 2 or 3 years ago. And it was the first time I played around with anything like that. So it was a really cool experience. But it was an experience. It wasn't a gaming experience like actually playing a video game. It was just a cool thing to do once. And then after that, all the booths we went to for the previous 2 years, everyone was asking, do you want to try our VR, whatever? And the answer was always no. No, I don't want to try it. I want to talk to you and understand the product. I don't want to put the thing on and then that's my 30 minutes at the booth. It takes too long, and we didn't get the information. So the next content piece we produced after more time with VR, after doing some of those, was don't be a first-gen adopter. And that video got a lot of people really upset who are early adopters of VR, because I was basically saying in an opinion format, this thing isn't ready, wait for 2nd generation, let's see how it goes. And some people didn't like that, and that's fine, but it was an opinion piece, so deal with it. I don't know. So all of that to say that, what happened to VR? Well, a lot of the points we made in that video were price, still expensive. That instantly puts a lot of people off buying. And then the bigger problem, I think, and this is opinion territory. It's okay if you disagree with me, and I might disagree with you, but it's opinion territory. This isn't like an objective test. The thing with VR, I think, is that there is a lack of really mechanically driven games. There are a couple good ones. Elite Dangerous is more of a traditional game, but you can play it in VR. The mechanics work pretty well. Another game would be the, Robo Rally or something like that. Some of those games are okay as well. Raw data is pretty cool, but developers are still learning how to build for this new type of input and new type of output. And until there's a turning point where they really understand how to build a game that's not a wave shooter and not a traditional game that just happens to use a different form of monitor, then maybe there will be more adoption. But right now, there aren't enough applications out there for people who are not loaded with money to pick up VR. That's kind of what I think is happening. And as far as the hype, you had companies like, all of them really, AMD, NVIDIA, Intel, all the big three have been and continue to push VR because it's such a stressful application that if they can slap a sticker on their box that says, we can play, we're VR ready, then they think it sells more units. So of course there's all your hype right there. And it starts bubbling away because there's just not a ton of adoption. It's still doing quite well, don't get me wrong. The VR market is okay right now, but you're not hearing about it as much because these three big companies already made their push and now they're in the wait and see territory. So I think that's what happened to a lot of it. Is it was a huge marketing push. Everyone wanted to make a buck off of VR, and the adoption wasn't instant because even though it's really cool, there's not a strong enough draw from a mechanical perspective to draw on those types of players, and there's not a strong enough draw from a financial perspective to draw on the people who are more budget conscious because they just don't have the money or the physical space to set up VR and get the full experience. So you have all these companies who are trying to make the money, marketing, and then they just, the marketing funds were spent, and so you're not hearing about it as much. That's not to say VR is dead. We still test it. It's still an interesting application to test and benchmark, but it's also, I would agree with you that, yes, the marketing hype has slowed down, and that's because it's shipped. It's a thing now. People can buy it, and the companies don't really, they spent all their marketing money, so I think that kind of answers part of that question, but some of that's opinion. Take it for what you will. You don't have to agree with it. That's fine. It's not going to hurt my feelings. All right, so next topic gets back to more objective stuff and easy to answer things that are straightforward and not just opinion on how the state of VR is, which I know is going to be a bit touchy for some people. But yeah, again, no commentary on how VR is doing in terms of market share or anything, but that's what I think for in terms of adoption and hype. So the next one, Michel Jeandillou, I don't know, that's my best attempt, says it's not a hot topic anymore, but I've always wondered and never found an answer. Why does the overclocked R7 1700 perform nearly exactly the same as the overclocked 1800X in all tasks? I know it's the same architecture and all, but that's the point. If both CPUs are the same and perform almost identically, why would the more expensive one exist? Is there really no difference between the two? What did AMD put in the 1800X that made it more expensive, but not better when overclocked, I guess, is the question. We talk about this in the 1700 review. So the 1700 review, we basically said the 1800X is superfluous. If you're comfortable with overclocking, which all of you really should be if you're an enthusiast user and you're not like a business user where maybe you have warranty concerns or maybe just company policy is no overclocking, we need stability. But if you're an enthusiast, our recommendation was basically get a 1700 and overclock it because they're the same. And so that is the answer to your question. They're the same. The product is the same. The only difference between them is the 1800X ships with a higher clock out of the box than the 1700. So out of the box, it'll perform better. But if you can overclock it, and you can, if you overclock it to the same clock rate as the 1800X, they will perform the same, assuming the testing is done correctly. If you overclock it beyond the 1800X, it'll do better than the 1800X stock because not only is the architecture the same, but the CCXs are the same cores, same threads, same really everything except for clock rate out of box. So why should it exist? Well, that's sort of what we said in the 1800X review and then later in the 1700 review. There is a market for it. People who don't have the corporate policy headroom or who don't want to overclock for whatever reason and would rather spend $200 than spend 10 minutes overclocking, that is the audience it sells to. But seriously, it's 10 minutes of work to get a basic overclock that's stable, and then it's kind of fun to tune it anyway at that point and optimize things. So we would still recommend save the $200, put it towards anything else in the system, and overclock at 1700. But yeah, that's the answer to your question is there's no difference, just out of box clocks. So I think that answers that one. It is a bit superfluous for our audience just because you're dealing with people who either know how to overclock or are willing to learn. So why not? But yeah, hopefully that answers that one. The answer is there's no difference. Next question is pantsaregood says, I recall that you mentioned top exhaust fans can cause issues with large tower air coolers in some cases. Can you go into more detail on this, possibly running a Fractal Design Define S with 3 140mm intake and 1 140mm exhaust and trying to figure out if I'm better with an additional exhaust at the top or not. So that, the comment I made is, let's get this out of the way first. Case testing is the least scientific of all because there are 8 different variables for hardware, 7 or 8, that can influence the results. That said, if you're working with a tower cooler, generally speaking, in some cases, and they are all different, like the Kublai 04 or whatever it was we tested this on originally, in some cases, if you set the top as intake, it's better. If you set the top as exhaust, it can be worse for CPU cooling than if you have no fans up there at all. Well, no exhaust fans up there at all anyway. And the reason for that is if you have think of where the intake or the exhaust or whatever, the ventilation port in the top of the case, think of where that's located relative to the CPU tower cooler. If it's in front of the cooler and it's exhaust, what's happening is that's sort of stealing air. It comes in the front and gets stolen out the top by the exhaust fan before it ever makes its way to the tower cooler. So that's what happens there. Bit different if you have a radiator, but again, it's the least reliable testing of all just because there's so many variables. Everyone builds it a different way. But yeah, it comes down to, does the fan pull air away from the cooler before it makes it through the cooler? If the exhaust is behind the cooler, there's a better chance that it helps because the cooler is pushing that air out and it's just getting either sucked out through the top or through the back. If you already have a back exhaust, generally you're fine. Just kind of depends on what kind of RPMs you're running, how much pressure you're pushing through those front fans. But that's the idea. It's just, where is it positioned in the airflow channel to the cooler? Does it steal air from the cooler? And that more or less answers it. And then the last question was just kind of interesting. So this was on the How Do Manufacturers Feel About Mining video. And the question is from Zaydoon Al-Jebur, says, GN, as an independent channel, is it more profitable to use all your GPU inventory in mining? I mean, according to what you earn from this channel. The answer is no. A very definitive, hard no. Because the thing is, even with our GPU inventory, we make more money running a business, reviewing those products, than it could be. You don't put a dent into company expenses by making a couple dollars per day off of video cards. I played around with mining for a little bit to do that. How do manufacturers feel about mining video? It was a really brief thing to learn how it works. And I mean, from a financial perspective, absolutely not. It's not worth it. We tore it all down after learning how it works, and probably won't be pursuing it further. But that's because this is a business. So those resources are already allocated to things. The bench space, we've got only so many spots for benches to be set up. And if I can have it set up so that two benches are next to each other, one does production tests and one does gaming tests, and then the third bench does thermal tests, I can just switch the card 1, 2, 3 and go through all the tests really quickly. Whereas if I've got a machine running mining on one of them, first of all, room ambient is way higher. So that skews the thermal test. But more importantly, now I have to tear down and rebuild benches so that I can make a few dollars per day. So no, it doesn't make us more money to mine with our video cards. The amount of expenses to run a business are so far beyond $8 a day or $6 per day per video card, it's not even funny. So you're better off trying to use the space and the resources and the power and the products, like, I mean, it takes motherboards too and power supplies to actually review stuff that gets views, which generates money through advertising, than sitting in a corner for internet money, basically, that you hope will have value later. So that's my view on it. But that's just, I mean, if you're a business, it's a lot different perspective, as always. So that's all for this time. As always, you can leave your questions in the comment section below. For next time, subscribe for more. You can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. And then gamersnexus.net for the website. Stay tuned for more stuff this week. And thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time. Puck me. Puck you.